Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naz Della Rosa, and I'm the Marketing and Programs Manager for the Women's Edge Florida. It's my honor to welcome you to the third annual Women's Leadership Impact Study Reveal event. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to hand things over to Lindsay Murphy, Executive Director of the Women's Edge Florida. Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you, Naz. Good afternoon, everyone. We are absolutely delighted to have you here. Hot off the press today, we will talk about the impact study and the results of that for Florida. I would like to just start by thanking our amazing sponsors. First, I have to give a huge shout out to Florida Blue and the Florida Blue Foundation in particular. Thank you so much for coming alongside us year after year, making this impact study possible, to deliver this information, to publish the information, and most importantly, to get it out in the hands of all our change makers. A second huge shout out goes to our second sponsor, Kaufman Rossin, always here with us at the Women's Edge, arm in arm. Could not do this without you. Such important work. And again, thank you both for your dedication and support. With that said, I don't want to waste any more time. I am excited to introduce to you the official author of the report. And I want to share a little bit about Trish Foster before I hand her the mic. Trish Foster has been an absolute delight to work with on this journey and this project. She is the founder of a workplace culture, inclusion, and employee engagement consultancy, where she serves organizations across the U.S. and internationally. These clients have included startups, Fortune 100 companies, as well as nonprofit and even academic organizations. She is a very accomplished advisor, strategist, writer, speaker, and workshop facilitator. And she has also published multiple in-depth reports on workplace culture and inclusion topics. Previously, she served as the executive director of Bentley University's Center for Women in Business. And earlier, she served as the top executive for Ogilvy International Fleshman Hillard. I hope I said that right, Trish. Don't hesitate to correct me. But again, the author of this year's Women's Leadership Impact Study for Florida and our moderator today, Trish Foster.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was a really generous introduction. Everybody, it is fabulous to be here with all of you. And I've been fortunate enough to be on the journey of working with the Women's Edge on some of their reports and this important women's leadership work for a number of years. Here's what we're going to do. When I say a quick report review, I really do mean a quick one, because the main goal today is to be together in community to talk about the issues. You all can read the report. You're all going to get it. So I promise you I'll be quick on that sort of lecture part of this program. And then right after that, we're going to get into our panel discussion. We're going to bring in your questions. Anyone who's here, who's logged in, please share your questions in chat, and we'll either bring some of those questions in while I'm talking to the panelists, or depending on how the vibe is going here, we might hold them till the end, but I promise you we'll get to your questions. And at the end, Lindsay will do a quick wrap and maybe talk to you about getting involved in next year's study, and also make sure you have the link for the report for this year. Okay, with that, about the study. The goal of this longitudinal research is to catalyze progress in women's leadership. That includes the advancement of women who might be marginalized or underrepresented based on other identities. We always like to think about intersecting identities. The study looks at development, training, benefits, all supports that might help overcome barriers, which also means we look at the barriers themselves. I want to also note that part of the reason this research and the report is robust is we do cite extensive external research when it helps ground our work, when it helps give better context. And a moment of celebration, this marks the third research cycle in Florida. What about you? What about the organizations that participated in this wonderful research? Here's a little bit about you. Company revenues of participants range from 5 million a year to more than 50 million. Private companies, nonprofits, and public companies participate. And you can see the percentages there on the screen. There has been a steady increase in the percentage of public companies who are participating. Industries represented are wide, ranging from real estate and construction and financial services all the way to higher ed, public services, and publishing. And again, this is all gone into in greater detail in the report itself. The report is really user-friendly, okay? It is divided into two sections: our key findings and trends, and our roadmap for success. That roadmap for success is going to be mentioned frequently during today's session. Every year it's included. The whole idea is to empower you with tools that can help you, with strategies that can help you. And I would actually even gently suggest that you look back at previous year's reports and the roadmap for success that was included in those, because it is a bit different every year. And it's kind of interesting and helpful to see how we evolve it each year. With that, let's go ahead and get into what some of these key findings and trends are that we're seeing based on this year's report and a look at the previous two. We are absolutely, this is the good news, we are absolutely seeing continued intent to support and to develop women leaders. The hard news is that we're seeing a decline in action, specifically around goals and metrics and specific initiatives. One example is that respondents with goals to increase women in leadership have actually dropped from a high of 83% in 2021 to only 44% for the current study. Metrics are lagging similarly. Possible reasons, they come through a bit in some of the open-ended questions. We also, based on our expertise, can surmise some of it. And of course, you know we're going to get into this with the panel, but limited resource, a lack of prioritization and accountability, smaller organizations, the larger cultural, social, and legal environment, indeed, can also be a factor. Support in getting women of color to leadership has also declined after a really promising peak in 2022. We're seeing questionable support for women who identify as LGBTQ+. And because in all research, the data around this issue is always scant, we really do rely on some external data to provide context. And in fact, we know that 75% of women who identify as LGBTQ+ nationwide fear coming out at work. And a sizable portion of women need to come out at work quite often. So this is an issue and a concern. All right, more key findings. Respondents continue to leverage certain best practices. This is really good data. We see it, we see where it's being used and how it's being used, both in the quantitative data we're collecting and in the qualitative information we're getting from you. Mentorship is still very high. I combine mentorship and sponsorship, but you will see when you look at the report that mentorship is much more the utilized strategy rather than sponsorship. Flexible work, remote work offerings, mental health and well-being benefits, skills training, which is so essential. Newer innovations, that might be online platforms, virtual mentoring, even some AI-powered tools. And again, we'll come back to this in the roadmap for success. We got really valuable open-ended feedback, and I always talk about it because qualitative insights are so important. We see that informal initiatives are really utilized and people talked about them in their open-ended responses. We see that people are really committed to using the Women Edge roadmap for success. That's gratifying. We see more recognition of the challenges that all women are facing, the need for transparency. And so that was my quick summary of our findings. And I'm going to do the same with the roadmap now. The roadmap is robust, but we also try to keep it short enough that it doesn't bog you down. So what we want to do is encourage you, use this and make it your own, right? Some of the ideas we give you will resonate more than others. We understand that. All right, so the starting place should always be some sort of assessment. Assess your culture, assess what's going on with your employees in terms of engagement, assess your inclusion status, assess most of all your support for women in the context of this report. And we talk about how to use a blend of quantitative and qualitative approaches. I also want to note that with all of our recommendations here, we try to recognize everybody's resources are limited, because you know what, it doesn't matter how big your company is, your resources are always constrained in some way. Next, you need a plan, right? You know where you are, number one. Then number two, create a plan. Make sure it's aligned as much as possible with your overall organizational goals, that you incorporate very targeted programs, that you allocate resources in a smart, efficient way, wherever possible that you innovate, and where possible that you use metrics. And I know, again, in today's world, metrics are tricky. Culture. I want you to really think about it. Think of your culture as that foundation that holds up everything you do. Interestingly, we see that although there is an anti-DEI world that we are now confronting, concepts and values like inclusive culture and employee engagement remain absolutely respected and desirable values. We're going to lean into those. Next, provide your employees with tangible information and education and training, right? And every once in a while, training gets a bad rap. When it does, it's because it's used as a one-off. Don't do that, right? Instead, align it with everything else you're doing. Let it be sequential, let it be sustained. Have it make sense for your employees. Let them understand the why behind it. And I always want to talk for a moment when I discuss training and education about frontline managers. People's managers impact their work life more than anything else. And yet, frontline managers are often overlooked. Sometimes the top of the organization really gets it, and that information doesn't always trickle down to middle management. Use proven best practices, cost-effective approaches. We talked a little bit about some of them you are already using. I want to really affirm the importance of sticking with them and looking for new ones if you're not engaged in them yet. All right. And again, what we see is the importance of mentorship, the importance of sponsorship. In today's world, more than ever, the importance of allyship. ERGs, you might call yours something different. Employee resource groups, though. And customized career support where possible. I want to invite you at this moment. I want to say, this is a really safe space where we want people to ask questions. If any of these concepts or ideas are new to you, there's something you're not comfortable, this is your place to ask and learn more about them. So please be comfortable doing that. I know that people still sometimes get confused when we talk about the differences between mentorship and sponsorship and how allyship fits into the mix. Okay, a little bit more on our roadmap for success. We invite you to double down on communications. Why? It's core, right? Everybody knows it. Everybody knows that they should communicate. Research tells us loud and clear that most leaders do not communicate as much as they believe they are. All right. And then finally, we invite you to be accountable, to iterate, to course correct, and to embrace new approaches. We want you to be aware of how fast the world is moving, how fast business is evolving, and we want your innovations, your strategies to keep pace with that. We have quite a few charts and graphics in the report. I'm going to highlight just a couple here. And I think, again, they will maybe encourage you to open that report and look into the data a little bit more deeply. So we did talk about the percentage of women-led businesses, and I think it's really interesting to see where we stand. Not much difference from our last study to our most recent, but a big jump since the very first year. This I spoke to briefly already. We saw the goals to increase women in leadership really decreasing significantly. This is some of the sobering news that's hard for us to look at, but we have to be real around it, right? Likewise, with the support for women of color, we saw this wonderful increase in 2022. This was when, let's be honest, we had tailwinds. And those have shifted. We definitely are facing headwinds and more now in terms of supporting women of color, and we see it in the data. And then one more chart that I just wanted to call out briefly before we move to the panel is some of the best practices that you are using. I think that you might want to go back and look at this. You will see it again in the report, and it's just really interesting to see what's being utilized and what trends we're seeing and how things are being utilized. You can see that mentorship is still front and center. Interestingly, voluntary diversity training among our recipients, or excuse me, our respondents, is still fairly robust. With that, again, I'm guessing questions are getting popped into the chat. I see the numbers popping up, but I wasn't looking. It is my privilege to invite our panelists to join me now. And we have here today with us Soyini Chang, CEO and co-founder of Quantum Power Skills, Dr. Loubna Nourredin, CEO and co-founder of Mind Market, and Meredith Tucker, principal at Kaufman Rossin. I can't tell you how happy I am to have you here with me, and I know on behalf of the Women's Edge, I want to say how much I know they appreciate your giving this time today to speak about these important issues. You know, before you do, I think one thing I want to say is sometimes people who have been at this for a long time say, haven't we made enough progress? The reality is we haven't. The success that women have seen is actually really fragile. It can slip away easily and quickly. And we see it in the broader data. We see that women still lose ground in the very first jump to management. And you know, there's interesting data, and I just have to name it. And this gets into intersecting identities. We see that Asian women in general are being promoted to that first level of management at a rate that's much closer to men than in the past. But guess what? Asian women and Latino women fall off at terrific rates later in the pipeline. So we have a lot of work to do, and I know everyone here is like-minded around that. That is my plug at the beginning of our panel. With that, Meredith, Soyini, and Loubna, I'm looking at you in the order you're appearing in my screen. I invite each of you to give a brief introduction about, so the audience that's here knows a little bit about each of you before we get into the discussion. And Meredith, I'm going to start with you since you're at the top of my screen.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Are you able to hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you, for allowing us to be here and the study, which is such fascinating results. I had a moment where I had to laugh at myself. I'm a CPA at a large public accounting firm, and I noticed like the comical stack of papers behind me as I was about to unmute. So I started at the firm as an intern 20 years ago. I grew up in a Jewish family. My mother is very much the matriarch, is a PhD in statistics. And I have to admit, I didn't realize that women weren't in charge until a shockingly old age. I was just in an environment where I assumed that's how all families worked, which has very much influenced my worldview, and interesting to then move into a male-dominated industry. So I'm fascinated to discuss the results today. Throughout my work here, I oversee a practice called entrepreneurial services. So I work with closely held businesses, meaning not public companies, and their owners, and we do taxes and planning, and also sort of like operational consulting, where we become the sounding board for a lot of these entrepreneurs. So it's been an interesting perspective on women-led businesses compared to men-led businesses, and what happens inside of companies where woman leadership is focused on. And I'll share as we continue to talk here also some perspective from the journey that Kaufman Rossin has been on as a large CPA firm, which is now 700 people strong. It's been a real focus of ours for the past few years. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, Meredith. And Soyini, can I invite you to give a brief introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Trish, and thank you so much to the Women's Edge organization for just creating this environment for us to have these conversations. It truly is an honor and a privilege, and I invite everybody to continue these conversations even offline after today's conversation happens. So I am the co-founder and CEO of Quantum Power Skills. We are a transformative business management consulting firm advancing human equity outcomes across all intersections of people and in business operations. We specialize in strategies that empower brands to lead with inclusive leadership, driving a positive business impact. And so similar to Meredith, like this idea of women not being leaders was foreign to me. I'm a first generation immigrant myself. I am of Jamaican and Chinese descent. Everybody always asks me, Soyini, is your husband from China? And I'm like, no, if you want to talk to my father, though, he is from Jamaica. And so, no, my husband's not from China. And so this is my birth name, and it's always my diversity icebreaker conversation with them is just my name. But it just speaks to the fact that, we're always regularly making assumptions. Even in our own minds, we have these sort of limiting biases that show up and rear their ugly heads. I will say that to just, I'll park here because I know we have other introductions, but I'm really excited about us really unpacking a lot of the content here and the data that you've presented, Trish. I think it's very illuminating, and especially watching the trajectory of changes that have happened post the George Floyd. So I'll stop there, and let's keep this going.
Fabulous, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Loubna.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Trish and Women's Edge for making this possible, and I say what Soyini said, we need to continue these conversations as we go. I'm the co-founder and CEO of My Market. We're a small boutique firm that partners with CEOs to create a constant stream of ready now leaders that can tackle any challenge. And change is a very powerful phenomena for me. I've been not through one, but two civil wars. And so I am a strong believer that we are so much more than our survival skills. And I've spent the last 22 years studying human behavior and work behavior specifically. And I can tell you, truly, the fear in corporate is for real. I had forgotten about the fear of the war until I worked in corporate and found people feeling unsafe, or the fear of losing your home or not being able to feed your kids. It's really real, and we need to do a lot more than we think we are doing. So I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you so very much. And with that, I'm going to get us going with the first question. And folks who are here listening and observing, I want to let you know that our panelists and I have agreed that we won't necessarily try to ask, every single panelist to answer every question. We want to make this as conversational as possible. So we'll let you know that as the audience too. I'm going to kick it off with a question, and honestly, whoever here feels like taking it up first can. I think I want to get to maybe the hardest thing that we found in the research first. Let's just tackle it head on. And that's that we really saw a gap between businesses' intent to support, their stated intent to support women in leadership, and specific action, specific goals. We saw fall off, in fact, from the earlier studies. And I'd love to hear you either comment on why you think that is, or any solutions you might have. And I invite either Soyini, Loubna, or Meredith to take that first.
Sure, I'm happy to take it on. And in a very, very simple term, I really believe in simplicity. There's a huge sense of overwhelm and a missed opportunity for what is a priority in the workplace. I work with a lot of female. I work with a lot of female leaders and male executives in small, medium companies, and the sense of overwhelm and decision fatigue is truly serious. And so I do believe the intent is there, the time or action is not. So when we're overwhelmed, conflicting priorities get in the way of change, and it gets in the way of positive human-centered change. And that, to me, I believe is what's happening. The intent is there, the time and action is not.
Thank you so much, Loubna. And Soyini, I see that you came off mute. I think you have something to say.
Yeah, Loubna, I think that is spot on. I'd like to add to it, in addition to what you just said. Leaders are struggling because of what you just mentioned. It's an effect, but because of that, they're struggling with how to navigate. The leaders need leaders helping them. And they need those leaders helping them on a regular iteration, consistently, in order to actually make this work a business imperative, that they tie it back into their strategy. It's tied back into what drives the company to actually succeed. And so they are struggling with regards to, like you mentioned, decision fatigue and the overwhelmingness, but they also have to open up themselves to having other leaders helping them navigate through the change, because we all know already that when it gets in that bottleneck and when it gets hard, that's when you got to make the most challenging decisions. You've got to make the bigger decisions that don't end up being a missed opportunity. So I would say, to add to it, we need to consistently provide that leadership to the leaders on a regular basis.
And Meredith, do you want to comment on this one, or do you want to hold?
I'll hold. I just agree with what the ladies have said so poignantly.
Yeah. I think that what I'd love for us to do, there are not easy answers, right? We're in a hard time, and we need to be real about that. What are some of the solutions? What are some of the ways we help the leaders who want to do well?
I'll take that to start with. I'm so focused on what the tone at the top and the culture of the organization brings to the table. I happen to work in a practice with a lot of women at all different generations. So prior to today, I was chatting with them. Some of these folks are young ladies that were interns and recently came over as staff. Others are managers who have been here for decades. And it is conversations like this, which don't just happen in this type of environment, which of course is so important, but that we are free to have at the office, that I think is really the basis of this step forward that we're taking collectively. And I understand that that's less flashy than the programs, which are so important as the study shows. And I understand that you have to make the business case. I think it's very important to be communicating that and empowering the leaders to put it in business terms, so that when somebody starts to express hesitancy or just doesn't get it, you're able to say, look, this is not just the right thing to do, but this is making us a better, stronger place. But outside of those formal plans, knowing that I can have a conversation with a young person who said, oh, I spoke to this legacy partner and I was having trouble getting them to call me back and I'm feeling intimidated, and just all these little micro interactions, I think, really add up over time to a place where we can be candid, we can talk about strategies, and they understand the type of thinking that happens even at these high levels of leadership. So people who look at me and think, well, you've got it figured out, you're already at this high level. But of course, I still have challenges to where I am and dealing with management, even in the most wonderful company, I've ever been with. So the openness, I think, is a big part of it.
Meredith, thank you.
Trish, I agree with Meredith. It really takes the conversations at the top to drive the change. And follow through is quite difficult, especially when you're a big picture person. There's so much going on, and follow through is not one of your strengths as in executive top leadership. And I think where I have seen it work and work really well is when you have a champion of change at the top of the organization. When someone is really passionate and committed to making female leadership exceed what they have, and that passion drives the change. And when it's at the top, the follow through happens because their word is law. And so the more this more priorities we have, the less we can truly get into a place where we follow through on these actions. So a passionate, committed person, and now, especially now with all of these technological disruptions that we have in the workplace, there's no better time to have more intentional leaders that are passionate about the human side of change.
Yeah. I'll speak to the data for a moment on that. So I'll move out of my moderator role and into my advisor role for just 1 second here. And that is that what these fabulous panelists are telling everybody is spot on. I mean, the research tells us that it doesn't matter what you do, long term, if you don't have strong commitment from the top, you will not succeed. You might get some small wins. It's also particularly easy to backslide, right? And we talked about the fragile nature of the success we've seen in women's leadership in recent years. And that's why I talked about that again. And I think, and by the way, I really like that some of the questions that popped into the chat went directly to this question. It's like, what do we do? What do we do to bridge the gap between intent and action? I think I would also like to add, and again, invite any of you to jump in if you want, that importance of communication. Sometimes the leaders at the top do have the right values and do mean well. They're not communicating effectively, or they're not arming their frontline managers to communicate properly. I think that that's a huge piece of this. And we see this in the independent data. What about allyship and the concept of allyship? Because, for gender equity, male allyship has always been a key strategy. And we're at this really interesting place and time in our societal culture where, a lot of younger men actually feel alienated, and that's a whole lot, that's a separate topic for another time, but I'm going to acknowledge it. I think that I would love to hear any of your thoughts on the role of male allyship in women's advancement.
I'll chime in there, Trish. We need we need male allyship. It's imperative. It is absolutely imperative in order for us to reach the path of progress that we believe can materialize, that with the potential of that to even come to light. We need their allyship, and we can already learn from some of the lessons that we've had to experience within the past 2 to 3 years now. You know, post George Floyd, if you look at the data, it showed an uptick in female leadership where more women were being hired, put in a position of power. But then you saw the downslide happen, right? There's a lot of reasons why that occurred, but I'm going to say one of them is the missed opportunity of us not truly galvanizing male allyship in the work that we're doing. We need their support from a data and percentage perspective. We need their buy-in, and we need their influence of their positional power to utilize their positional power to influence the work that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Without it, we will not get to the success that we should. Unfortunately, within the past few years, we've seen things like the word privilege be called just white privilege. It's not just white privilege. You can ask all the attendees that just attended my session. We all have some kind of privilege. Everybody. Now, the unfortunate part is that privilege has been used as a structural element in the system of the organization. We need to remove it as a structural element, and we need to ask people to utilize their positional power and their privilege for the advancement of everyone to actually build this equity infrastructure the right way. But we can't do it without their support. Unfortunately, there's been some missteps on our part when it came to alienating the men or weaponizing their privileges against them, whether it's through media, social media, et cetera, and other outlets. But because of those missteps, they started to feel like, oh, it was reversed. They started to internalize things in a way that was very negative. So we had some missteps as in the positions that we were in regards to that. And maybe it just got more hype because I was always been doing the work. I know Meredith was still doing the work. I know Loubna was still doing the work. But unfortunately, some bad apples, their projections got illuminated more, it got magnetized more out there in social media. And so here we are now dealing with the ramifications of that because men felt like they couldn't be a part of the solution.
You know, a couple of things that we could think about in terms of helping men know how much they're part of the solution is really treating them as partners, is saying, you know, how can I be an ally to you as well? Let's be allies together, telling them your story so they understand why it is you need them, why allyship is still really important. Other thoughts that any of you have on this topic of allyship?
I think somehow we shifted from a place of, inspiring change to more of a shame and blame. I don't know how our generation somehow failed to stop that from happening, because with shame and blame comes fear and resistance to change. So allyship is a powerful phenomenon. And again, when it's a top leader that is driving that, it impacts a lot more people. And what I see is conversations like these will truly allow people that are not thinking about it or that take it for granted, their success is because of their worth and their value and their work. They start to realize that there's an unconscious bias, right, that gets in the way of promoting that person that just does not look like me or talk like me or behaves like me, and that the guys club is for real. The phenomena is for real in engineering, in the physician world, and in the science world. So I think the conversation, the more we talk about it, and the more we have conversations where people feel comfortable to speak up, it would make this better. And a great example to share with Meredith and Soyini and the team, everyone here, is my cousin called me from New Jersey, and he said he stopped paying money toward women football And I'm like, why did you stop? He said, well, I always felt forced to do it because I didn't want to be the bad guy that everyone points at because I don't support, like I'm the bad guy in the group. So I did it because I felt forced. Now I don't feel forced anymore. And I had a conversation with him about it, right? And those conversations matter because I want someone to feel forced to do something or shame or blame. And that's, we're paying back for some of that, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Loubna. That was profound. Meredith.
I was reflecting on allyship and a couple observations from where I sit. So one thing that I've noticed that's fascinating to me is that the men in my practice who are having kids and taking a different role in parenting than maybe generations before them, right? These are men who are going home, putting kids to bed, making dinners, all the things that we get zero credit for, that my grandmother would sit there and applaud because, how wonderful that they're engaged with the babies. But it's been very interesting to see men of the older generation who haven't understood this behavior, who saw it as a detriment to the practice and the business, and even sort of judgmental towards these men for their decisions. But I think that change in kind of the divide of caregiving responsibilities is a big part of the allyship, at least for many people I work with, because this caregiving role that women take on really, I think, is at the root of a lot of the disparity that we're seeing. And it's been really fabulous to watch men, I think, walk down that path, not only because of what it represents to everybody on the team, but because of the understanding that comes with it as to the type of multitasking and stress it adds on a day-to-day basis. There was another sort of different talking point. The firm KR has worked with an amazing consultant on these matters, a lady named Mary Bennett. And early on in this process, Mary said something that's really stuck with me, which is, if you are a woman who feels as though, sexism has kept you from excelling in a company, and you start to establish leadership programs to help these folks who feel that way succeed, it forces them to turn the spotlight onto what they could be doing differently. Maybe they have some professional deficiencies or areas for improvement that they kind of turned a blind eye to because it was easier to say, oh, I'm being kept out of these rooms because of the mindset of the leaders, not because I could be more analytical or representing myself better or whatever the case may be. So one of the ways that I've seen allyship be really effective, and some of the men, because in our firm there are some folks of this older generation, they tend to be girl dads who have raised daughters who do such a beautiful job, and part of what they're bringing to the table is really clear feedback to women. So, of course, part of it is making sure they're in the right rooms, their names are mentioned in the right places, they're, viewed and selected for opportunity. But I think another part of it is having the respect for a colleague to say, no, you just could have done better at this opportunity. And here's what I think you need to improve on. And maybe that has nothing to do with women leadership. So I think it's been an evolution for everybody, which is interesting.
Yeah, you just hit on so many relevant points. Again, we could do workshops on several of those points, right? And I think one thing that I would love to go back to is that you kind of mentioned feedback. And I feel like it's always really important to talk about how critical, honest, authentic, constructive feedback is. And that is an example of where women still lag. We don't get the feedback we need that will help propel us in our careers, right? And interestingly, there's two sides to that coin. One is that we simply just don't get the feedback we need, period. And we are, instead of our skills and our abilities being discussed, our personalities are discussed, right? There's that. But the other is feedback that is actually too nice at times. This is another problem, and that's the one that a lot of people don't know about. We talk often about the harsh feedback, about our, being criticized if we're assertive, we're told we're aggressive. But there's a man, in fact, perhaps, who is afraid of hurting the woman, doesn't give her the feedback she needs. So again, the intent on his part is actually good in a way. It's that he doesn't want to hurt her, but he's actually doing her a disservice. So that's getting in the weeds a little bit, but it's really relevant, and that's a little tip that somebody might be able to use. Make sure that if you are a woman on this call, are you demanding the feedback that you really deserve in order to propel your career forward? Does anybody want to say anything more about allyship before I take us in a slightly different direction? Thank you. I think that I would love to talk a little bit about the benefits, and I mean that in the broadest sense, the benefits, the flex, whatever it might be, that support women, that help entice women to join your organization and help keep them at your organization and help them thrive so that they can rise to leadership.
I would love to talk on this for a second. So when I started at the firm, there were a number of people in our practice area referred to as flex timers. And these were women who did not work either the same amount of overtime as other people or were actually part-time. And it was viewed in a little bit of a disparaging way. There were conversations of, oh, well, their kids are old enough now. Shouldn't they be going back to full time? And there weren't really any mechanisms in place when it came to evaluating people, let's say at the end of the year, to make sure that the flex time contributions were sort of compared in an apples to apples manner with the full-time folks. And a big part of my trajectory as practice leader has been to lean into these people who tend to be some of the most brilliant, most long-serving folks. They tend to be, that adage of if you want something done, give it to a busy woman. There's nobody I would rather work with than a working mom who knows how to multitask. And as the world has become more sort of chaotic and everybody's forced into adapting to where and when we work, these people have had a leg up on, the men who were used to coming in and sitting at the desk from, 9 till 6, that they're used to taking it on the go and fitting it all in. And changing even the metrics that we use and the reporting systems, that's been a big push. So when we as department heads get stats at the end of the year and it shows the number of overtime hours, well, of course the flex time folks are never going to have the same number of hours. So instead I normalize it and say, well, what percentage did they work over? All these little things to make sure that we're able to evaluate them more fully. But I'm pleased that this is such a vibrant part of our practice. I think it's impacted our ability to connect with our clients. I think obviously these women have greater sort of warmth and engagement. They do have this superpower of multitasking, and I'm just so pleased that it's a really big part of our group.
Thank you, Meredith.
I'd love to share 2 examples. We're not doing enough in that field. It's still perceived as a gift, as something to be grateful for instead of necessity. And in the physician world, scientific-based study shows that female physicians retire 10 years from their practice before their male counterparts, 10 years. Engineers, 8 years. So we have a problem, and it's the lack of flexibility. This new generation is challenging the system, and it's asking for change to happen. And you have this conflict between the older generation and the new one, because they see this new generation as asking for too much, not giving enough. And that's a story for a different day. However, I really think that the flexibility challenge is not mature enough because there is productivity paranoia, and it's for real. In the Microsoft workforce report, 20,000 people were included. The managers do have a challenge with flexibility. On the other hand, many large organizations are offering all sorts of well-being programs like yoga and stretching and breathing. When we talk to the manager, specifically the frontline manager, they tell us, we don't have time for this. We don't have the time. I want to be with my kids. I don't want to be here. My flex time is outside the office, not inside the office. So we still, I think we're going through the change. We're far from advanced in that area, and there's a lot we can do for specifically female leadership in the workplace.
Soyini.
Yeah, just to add to what both women have stated, we can utilize technology and AI in a way that's very meaningful, right, with what Meredith just mentioned, as far as like creating this consistent feedback loop, right? If you think about gaming, if you move your man this way, it's gonna die, and then you get another man, that's immediate kind of instant information that's like, okay, I got to get enough points so that I can get another man on the board. And so we've got to consistently utilize the technology in a way that's meaningful towards the changes that we're trying to do and alleviate some of that exhaustion and fatigue off of middle management. The skill sets that were necessary for leadership 20, 30 years ago, they didn't get, we didn't get that now. Like those transferable skills that women are very strong in, that you just mentioned, multitasking, being able to manage the household the way that they do. We haven't quite adopted, like those transferable skills are really important in the business world. And a lot of leaders who have been over the past 20, 30 years, maybe they went and got their MBAs and they got their training, but those other skills, they didn't actually get to develop that emotional intelligence in the ways that women have consistently been working that muscle, right? And so it's muscle memory now for so many women in many regards. But one, the system has to see that the value proposition of that emotional intelligence, transfer that into the standards and procedures of the workforce, how we operate. And then two, we can leverage AI to give us more consistent feedback so that we can do better at how we evaluate, sort of, as Meredith mentioned, the apples and the oranges. How do we sort of level set that in a way that standardizes things, and make that a part of our operational procedures?
Yeah, thank you, Soyini. This was all valuable. You all covered a ton in that one broad question we asked around how do we, provide more benefits, flex, and everything else, and I loved it. I tried to address, we had two questions in the chat early on, and I tried to address them in our discussion, but I want to make sure, because our time is starting to run short, that we really did get to them for these audience members. So let's just go back and even give them both a chance. It was Sue and Kelly, to make sure that they feel like we got to these questions, even if we weren't able to fully answer them, that we at least tried. I think the drop off is in numbers from 22 to 23, 4. I just want to clarify which numbers you were talking about, Sue. And then Kelly talked about 94% of companies express this desire to develop hypo women. Only 27% are dedicating resources to leadership development. I think we really did talk about that, but let's revisit it. What strategies have we seen that might work in bridging the gap between intent and action? We want leadership commitment, right? We really talked about that. We need to arm frontline managers with training and I think talking points in today's world as well. Because I think people are even afraid of what to do or say, and you've got to do that. What did we miss there for Kelly? And again, Sue, if you're still with us, I'm gonna invite you to restate what it is you're looking for in the chat if you wish.
Trish, I'll jump in here for a second. I think one of the
Absolutely.
things that really stands out to me now that we've done this research is I don't know that companies are aware that there is this drastic of a gap in their intention and their action. I think it really starts with leveraging our networks and our platforms to be able to get out and say, we've done this research and we can tell you just as a state, there is, from 94%, really 27 are dedicating resources. I think that in itself speaks volumes. If it gets in the right hands, the leader in the power position, a decision maker, I would be curious to see how they react and then how they move and really put the ball back in. You now have been armed with this information. And so you do have the power to allocate resources and to speak directly down. And so what does that now look like for you? And how does an organization like the Women's Edge and our partners come alongside you to not just talk, but walk so that when we do this in 2026, we are not having the same conversation and there's no excuse because now you have the data.
Lindsay, thank you so much. I think that was really great input. And Kelly, I see what you have there. I think that Sue, the issue with women of color that came through in our report, and again, I hope I'm getting at your concern, is the lack of support is what has dropped off. And I think what I acknowledged, and maybe I didn't say it forcefully enough, is we can make conclusions. Remember, this is social science research. We can draw conclusions. Very likely what we have seen, not just in Florida, but across the country, is that we had tailwinds at our back post George Floyd. And now we face headwinds, right? We have had this complete turnaround where people are fearful. And for people who were never authentically committed, whether it was to supporting women of color or LGBTQ plus women or all women or anyone who is marginalized, people who were never authentically committed now have a really good excuse to fall back. And I think that that's what we're seeing. However, I think that this will be a great way to wrap because it's really important. If any of you want to add anything to that, please do, because we are, and then I have to turn it over to Lindsay to wrap us up.
I think well said, Lindsay. If there's anything I want to leave with is what we ignore, we reinforce. So when we ignore the behaviors, we reinforce those behaviors. And at different levels of the organization, sometimes we may just feel it's easier to be silent and not speak up. And especially women, speak up. There's no shyness in this. There's a power in measuring. When we measure, we improve. What we do not measure, we ignore. So I think even if it's simple stats to start with, data speaks volume, and to start somewhere. Sometimes the best practices happen in one department, creates the spark for the organization. So, and I do believe that we sometimes act small and we are bigger than what you believe because your voice might be the one that transcends and help people recognize subtle behaviors, unconscious behaviors that they do. No shaming, no blaming. Awareness is a superpower, and you are bigger than what you believe to be.
Loubna, that was such a wonderful way to wrap this discussion. And Lindsay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I thank those of you who participated from the audience via the chat. Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trish. Thank you to our panelists, Soyini, Dr. Loubna, Meredith, each of your perspectives I was taking a ton of notes. My mind is just, I'm, already sparking ideas and things to do. But great conversation. Thank you again to our partners at the Florida Blue Foundation and Kaufman Rossin. You made this possible today. With that, a little call to action, an exciting announcement. The report is officially now available for you to review in its entirety. You can scan this QR code now to open the report, save it, download it, and continue these conversations. Again, I'm Lindsay Murphy. I am the executive director with the privilege to lead Florida for the Women's Edge, and my email is here. I would love to connect with you. I encourage you to follow, connect with our panelist and Trish on LinkedIn and continue these conversations. They are experts leading in these discussions. And most importantly, we are conveners of these important conversations, and we are here to collaborate and partner with you to move the needle. I want to end by saying thank you to the CEO of the Women's Edge, Elizabeth Heiler, who joined us today. Thank you for allowing the space and time to do this. It's very important work, and it's just the beginning. So with that, we leave you with encouragement and gratitude, and thank you.